Chapter 2. Human Intervention. That'll teach you, you stupid little child. Never mock an Arkan soldier. Dib's head swirled with fragments of the past that came and went like an autumn wind. He and Zim weren't exactly enemies anymore, and though Dib wanted to construct some sort of friendship, like he was trying to build a rickety shack on a cliff face, he wasn't sure if Zim would ever just relax. Dib knew why the alien was slowing down, but he wasn't quite sure if Zim knew. He was pretty sure the Urkin did know, and neither of them wanted to see that ugly truth that grew more real by the day. Dib, hunching his shoulders up against the cold winter wind, hurried up to Zim's front yard that was littered with the usual gnomes and misshapen birds. He rolled up his trench coat sleeve to feel the scar there that he'd gotten that day at the gym when he was 15. Zim had been strong back then, and dangerous too. They had almost gotten into big trouble that day. Okay, class, time for some physical education. There was a groan from most of the children combined. No one was particularly enthused with PE. If it wasn't cold outside, it was freezing, even within the smelly gymnasium hall that had cobwebs and always stank of old sweat and musty clothes. The teacher, Mr. Hedge, was giving them all exercise tips before they went out onto the playing field. They were all lined up against the wall in their skimpy PE shorts and shirts. From the look on Zim's face, Dib could tell that he detested the routine as well as he did, especially when he had to dress down to reveal more of himself than he liked. And his short stature was extra evident when he had to line up with all the other taller children. The kids purposefully bumped into him, calling him names like Frankenstein and making faces at him. Dib often watched as his teasing went on, wondering if Zim would reach his limit and explode outward with his pack foray, exposing himself in the process. But he never did. He took the bullying rather well. In fact, sometimes it only fed his anger and hatred. Not exactly good when he could later lay it all on Dib. After running around a miserable playing field for an hour, the class returned to the changing rooms to shower and get back into their old clothes. He waited for Zim to come to the decision of removing his shirt, and when he did, Dib bounced into the fray, snatched the shirt off him, and went running down the hall screaming, "Zim's an alien! Look how green he is!" Half naked and enraged, Zim took off after him. "Stink beast! Release that shirt or I'll cut you into 1,000 tiny, tiny pieces!" Dib yelled from over his shoulder. "What's the matter, Zim? Too slow without your mechanical struts? Or are you just plain lazy? I know! It's because you're short, isn't that right?" The flight was as fun as his actual battles, if not better. The adrenaline soaked into him like he just injected himself with ecstasy, and he felt so alive. It was these moments that he remembered the most, rather than the aftermaths. Except for this day. Eventually, as he knew he would, Dib ran out of places to run to. Zim never seemed to run out of steam. The boy ended up outside again, behind an old building the adults were using to teach religious studies. Dib, caught in a dead end, was sweaty and panting, the PE lesson having worn him out, but not Zim. He came around the corner slowly like some psychopathic killer in the movies with not a bead of sweat on him. His chest wasn't even moving strenuously. How could someone be so physically fit? And he was so small. Already Dib had longer legs, and as a result had a longer stride from his recent growth spurt. Had Zim cheated somehow? In his hands, he still held on to the alien's slightly grass-stained shirt. In the face of anxiety, he leveled his gaze and confronted his demon, hoping that his challenge wouldn't go unheard, and that the other children would come running. "What's wrong, space monster? Worried everyone will see how disgustingly green you are all over?" Had he not read Zim correctly? Had he overstepped some secret invisible line? For instead of slipping into the usual charade of trading insults, Zim struck out with a pack leg, something he rarely did in case of being seen by other humans. Its mordant point, sharp as a needle, sunk into Dib's right arm without prelude. The pain started as something small, and barely registered, then the agony seemed to explode all over him. Dib screamed out and dropped the shirt. Zim yanked out his spider leg, causing Dib's arm to run red. "That'll teach you, you stupid little child! Never mock an Urkin soldier!" Dib had just stared down at the increasing outspread of red sweeping down his arm until it was dripping off his fingers and elbow. His clothes were doing little to soak it up. Dib stink? Dib pulled the sleeve back down his arm, covering up the star-shaped scars. He stood at Zim's purple door. Even though he had been in great pain, he had found it mildly amusing to see the shame fill Zim's face. And though the alien uttered not a word as he backed away, the apology was in his eyes. Dib was taken to the nurse, and then the hospital. 15 stitches he had, and he hadn't said a word about Zim and how he'd gotten a life-threatening injury. He could have gotten them in some pretty serious shit, and it might have even led to his exposure, but he hadn't, making up some lame excuse had he fallen on a piece of glass. Why had he done it? He wasn't so sure at the time. Probably because he didn't want the battles to end so abruptly. He had the power he'd been wanting since he was 11. Maybe because it wasn't a very fitting end to their charades. Maybe it was because he'd seen the look of guilt, that unsaid apology in Zim's eyes. The scar was forever the reminder of what he could have done, and what he chose not to do. I suppose the thought of Zim rotting away in some lab was always my one fear too. Dib hated coming to his house regardless. They had a meeting ground that was neutral, and coming to his enemy's home turf was never easy. It was a psychological battle, sometimes before the real one began. Despite his age, Zim sometimes made him feel like a little boy again. Harvesting his courage, he raised his fist and knocked 3 times on the alien's door, hoping against hope that no one would answer. He drifted, and drifted, He was back under that console again, straining to modulate the wires while the bass crashed and burned around him. Someone was calling his name, only he would not answer, could not answer. He had to do this. He had to fix it. It was his mistake, his blunder that had to be amended, lest it do any more damage. But the call got harder to ignore. Soon, an individual word could be heard over the hissing and roaring of the flames. Zim! Zim! Nearly there, just a little more. Before he knew it, he was plunging through a twirling dark abyss full of red eyes. He screamed. He had been so close. Just a little more and he would have succeeded. And then terrible dark weakened, and the calls grew more real, more solid. Eyes he didn't even know he'd been holding closed tried to open. He was inundated with diaphanous light, and something large and fuzzy stood before his blurred vision. Zim? Zim, oh thank God, it's me. Zim's brain, stupid with sleep, tried to process this new situation. He went to open his eyes wider, and the world started to focus a little more. The blurred figure in full view was none other than Dib, and this alarmed him deeply. Why was he sleepy and drowsy with the enemy right above him? Had he been captured at last? Was he restrained? His defenses removed? Panic began to hammer at his internal walls. His tiny, slit nostrils tried to pick up smells, and all he could smell was the heavy pungency of man. His broken and smooth antenna twitched a little at the tick-tock of a nearby clock, and the vibrations of the February winds outside, accompanied by the flurry of the car as it rushed on by. Where were the scalpels, the drills, the stink of the chemicals and synthetic gloves? Easy, Zim. It's okay. You're safe. These words had little meaning to him. Why was Dib even saying these words? Had something happened? Where was Gur? Why could he not hear the pulse of his computers? The Irken soldier struggled to sit up, his brain still sluggish and overspent somehow, as if he'd just downed a whole barrel of human alcohol in less than 2 minutes. Dib, where's... The voice that came out of his throat was not his own. It was croaky and frail. When one arm tried to lift himself up, his elbow slipped and he went down again. But the short landing he had was a soft one. He gathered that he was resting on a plush array of pillows. Take it easy, Zim. You're still out of it. You must have had one heck of an accident. Accident? The word did not correlate with him. He hadn't had his last accident in months. Besides, such mishaps are usually well contained, and his computer mopped them up with perfunctory ease. Dib liked to think that he, an Irken elite, was accident-prone, but he begged to differ. The world and its details seemed to grow second by second. Dib's profile grew sharper before his very eyes until he could see the outline of Dib's glasses on his prim little nose and his dark swath of ebony hair. He then looked down and saw blankets cupping his body. He was slow to recognize the room, but when he did, a part of him tried to relax. He was at Dib's place. He wasn't in a lab. He was lying on Dib's couch. And the pillow supported his pack considerably, allowing him to rest easy on his back, a position that he rarely used. You're at my place. I took you here. The Dib looked stupidly concerned. It made the blemishes under his eyes look larger from behind his glasses. With some strength returning, his haze of sleep pushed slightly out of the way, Zim suddenly sat up, his heart leaping against his little ribs. When Dib approached him, hands open to try and soothe him, Zim revealed his teeth and hissed balefully. Stay back! Stay! Don't come near me! Easy there. I'm not here to hurt you. Dib spread his fingers on his palms, inciting surrender. Zim sparked in alarm when he felt tremendous pain on his side. He jerked down the blankets to reveal a naked torso. And on that torso were layers and layers of gauze that were secured around his belly. A belly that looked swollen. On his left side under his robes was a damp green stain where the blood had been seeping through. Zim, it's okay. Will you calm down? I'm naked! He cried back, his voice croakier than ever. His ability to shout had been disabled. Where's my uniform? Why aren't I at home in my base? Where's Gur? If I tell you, will you calm down? I put my neck out for you, you know, Dib said, sounding firm but not unkind. Zim's antenna hitched forwards in earnest, and they drew back in agitated fear. He pulled the blankets up to his chest, hissing in soreness from his wound. Then stop staring and tell me! Okay. Dib took a breath and sighed. Just don't kill me, alright? Unlike you, I don't lie. Anyways, about 2 hours ago, Gert called me. Said some nonsense about sauce. I wasn't interested. I thought it was just another one of his pranks. But I went over, thinking that you had another accident or something. I don't have accidents, Zim claimed angrily. Sure. Anyway, I went right up to your door and Gur answered. I followed him in and found you on the floor, covered in blood. Zim leaned against the backrest of the couch, his eyes wide and staring. His sight screamed at him to lie back down again, but he refused, frightened of looking vulnerable, frightened of Dib's next step, frightened of the unknown. Floor? He said, gulping. His mouth and throat were dry. Yeah, I thought you were dead, in all honesty. Kinda scared me. So I wrapped you up in my coat, sat you on my lap, and drove you to my place. Gur's still at your base, keeping it safe. I didn't want him in the way. Dib paused then, letting it all sink in. Then he asked, So what happened? What gave you that very specific injury? Zim curled up his toes at the memory. My uniform? In the washing machine, going round and round. It was saturated in blood, Zim. You can't possibly expect to wear it in such a state. Zim tried to piece together the information. Dib didn't look like he was lying. His face was pretty relaxed, pretty open. Why'd you do it? He asked curtly. Why'd you help me, pygmy? Dib shrugged. Honestly, no such moral dilemma even occurred to me at that moment. Come on, Zim, we've known each other now for some 20 years. Don't you think that should account for something? I think you're up to something. If I was, I would have done it by now, while you were unconscious. So tell me, what happened? You're good at avoiding the issue, Zim. I think you know better than you realize. Zim looked away. He was done with the conversation. It was easier to hate than it was to trust and believe. I fell down some stairs, he blurted without making eye contact. He went to bring his knees up to his chest when the huge tug of pain told him that it was a bad idea. You don't have any stairs, Dib said patiently. I do! He tried to yell, but his voice only came out as a rusty squeak. I can't believe you took me from my base, he is, trying to sound angry when his voice just kept crumbling in a hoarse croaks. And you touched me, ripped off my military uniform. I smell like you. It's disgusting. My base? You could have destroyed it. Dib smiled sadly for him. You were so cooperative when you were asleep, Zim. But just to remind you, I've sort of just saved your life. You owe me, little green thing. Zim spat at this. I don't need you or your smelly help. My pack takes care of everything. Sure it does, Dib replied just to tease him. Truth was, he was still a little perplexed and haunted by the night's events. Green blood still soiled the front of his shirt, and some of it had soaked through to his skin. He hadn't had time to change since taking Zim home. He still remembered getting into the car and tucking Zim onto his lap while he grabbed the steering wheel. Zim had been wrapped up in his coat, and still the blood dribbled out and onto Dib's pants and car seat. He'd pretty much driven like the devil down those shy 30 miles to get him home, thinking that even then, he'd arrived too late. Zim gave Dib an annoyed look, then kicked back the blankets with his good leg and turned to shimmy off the couch. Dib patiently drew closer to catch him in case he should fall. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Your wound hasn't been stitched up, and you'll only make the bleeding worse. You need to lie down and wait for your body to heal. You'd be surprised at our superior healing rate. Not that a dirty monkey like you would ever understand. Now get out of the way and bring me my uniform at once. I told you, it's in the wash. Zim more or less fell down the couch and landed painfully on his rump on the carpet. He let loose a loud hiss of pain, so much so that his thin tongue darted out between his teeth like a snake. Do you ever listen? Dib approached him so sternly that Zim paled under his towering shadow. Then, the human hooked his hands under Zim's armpits and lifted him back onto the couch, whereupon he recovered him with the blankets. With uncommon gentleness, he pushed him back down onto the pillows. By this time, the fire in Zim's side had spread, causing his chest and leg to ache miserably. So this time, he barely resisted when he felt Dib's hands guiding him down to rest. This is stupid, the little invader coughed in shrill anger. I'm lying on a filthy couch, in your filthy house. You're going to do something to me, I know it. The fucking FBI are on their way, I swear on the tallest. I'm making you some tea. You can drink tea. I've seen you have it before. He started moving away, and suddenly Zim didn't want him to go. He could not fathom why he felt like this. Probably because he knew he was the closest to death he had ever come in a very long while, and in a strange fit of madness he didn't want to be alone. An invader's calling was to be comfortable alone, no matter what happened. His military indoctrination had prepared him for all eventualities, but all the training in the known universe had little power over natural instinct. Dib? Dib halted in the doorway and turned to him expectantly. His face was carefully blank of expression. Zim balked against his sudden desires, hating this carousel of emotion. Just get my stinking uniform, you useless ape. You've upgraded me from monkey to ape? I feel privileged. And he left the room. Zim sunk back down, the pain causing him to shiver even though he did in fact feel warm. He turned his head slightly so that he could discern the parlor room window. It was very dark outside, and he wasn't sure how long he'd been out for. Hours? Maybe even a day? His antenna picked up the sounds of the Dib moving about in the kitchen, and every now and then the clink of porcelain and the thump of cupboard doors closing. While his mind was free to roam, his thoughts turned a dark path, and he remembered the way Gur had looked at him while he was drilling his hand deep into his flesh. Without his powerful working computer, he had no way to be sure how bad the internal damage was, but with this amount of blood still trying to pour out of him, he had a feeling Gur had gone through his smooch as well. The pack was whirring away like a washing machine, working hard to repair the damage. The pack was usually much faster at repairing him than this, which left him feeling a little worried. Dib presently returned carrying a plastic tray. On it were 2 steaming mugs of tea, and between them was a plate piled high with ginger biscuits. He settled the tray on the coffee table after shoving back the UFO magazines to make space. Luckily, Gur saved you too. If he hadn't have called, I think you'd be pretty dead, Zim. You better thank him, Dib said mildly. Zim wasn't sure what to say to this. If it wasn't for that robot, none of this would have happened, so he kept quiet. Dib waited for an answer, and he looked bewildered when he didn't get one. Zim was rarely quiet. In fact, his constant need for attention was often overwhelming. Dib got up and closed the curtains. He didn't need anyone peering in this late hour and seeing his alien. Then the phone rang. Zim literally jerked back up again and then dived under his blanket like a child hiding from the boogeyman. It's okay. Probably Gur just checking up on you. Dib closed his hand over the phone, picked it up, and answered without further ado. Yeah? Dib Membrane here. There was silence for a beat, and then Zim heard the soft tinkle of Dib's patented laughter. He relaxed a little as curiosity took over. Warily, he lowered his frontal blanket defense and peered up at Dib, who was busy talking on the phone. He paced as he spoke. Yeah, Dad, I know. I experienced it too. No, everything's okay. It all just turned on by itself. Didn't even need to find my fuse box. It did scare me a little. There was a brief pause, and he could see Dib's eyes wandering as he listened to the conversation on the other end of the line. Zim more or less sat like a rigid statue, the antenna erect on his head like aerial transceivers. Then Dib shook his head and chuckled again. Just for a moment, all worry dropped from his face, making him look 10 years younger. It's okay, Dad. Yeah, you too. Bye now. He hung up and looked over at his latest guest. That was my dad. It's fine. I didn't tell him anything. What did he want? Oh, nothing. He was just telling me that the whole of America pretty much just had a blackout. Apparently there was an EMP blast in my dad's lab. Experimental, of course, but it wasn't shielded properly, and it downed pretty much all electrical equipment. Zim frowned, causing his eyes to crease up a little. EMP? Yeah, it stands for electromagnetic pulse. My whole house went on the fritz for like 5 minutes. I thought you were playing a joke on me or something. This did not sit well with Zim. If what Dib was saying was true, then his base had been equally affected by this EMP. No wonder his entire base had melted into standby. Even his pack had not been spared from this human activity. Will it happen again, Pig Smelly? No, I don't think so. After all, it cripples us. Everything we use is pretty much electrical. He suddenly looked at Zim in a panic, realizing he had just said too much. But Zim looked so afraid that he doubted he was thinking about global domination right now. He kind of got the gist that something like this had happened to the Proud Urkin as well, and that might explain the awful wound in his side. After all, a nationwide blackout didn't happen every day, and Zim turning up with a massive hole under his ribs didn't happen every day either. But maybe he was just clutching at straws. Maybe the two events weren't related at all. Either way, why wouldn't Zim just tell him what happened, unless it was to do with some secret plot to wipe out mankind? Here. Dib picked up a mug and offered it to Zim. Drink it while it's hot. I put 2 teaspoons of sugar in there. Zim struggled to sit up, but he took the mug after giving him a meek thank you. He cradled the drink using both his claws and sipped tentatively at the hot liquid. At once it dampened his dry throat, and the incredible heat helped him feel warm and cozy. However, after each sip, his smooch gurgled into discomfort. To Dib's untrained ear, these gurgles sounded a lot like upset stomach rumblings. You're going to sleep here tonight, Zim, and first thing tomorrow morning, I promise I will drive you back home. How does that sound? Zim perked his smooth antenna at him like he was raising an eyebrow. I'm still trying to destroy Earth, you know. Perhaps you are more stupid than you look. Yeah, whatever. He drank down his tea in mere minutes and then grabbed a biscuit. I'm calling it a night, Zim. It's 3 in the morning. There are biscuits if you're hungry, but I'm going to bed. And no funny stuff while I'm gone. I mean it. I'm in no mood for fun, he said, taking the phrase literally. Dib just shook his head at him. He left, leaving the main parlor room light on. Zim sat, nestled in his blankets, feeling his smooch twist and turn as it tried to digest the liquids he'd recently taken. He listened to Dib's footsteps. First he heard him go into the kitchen to do some cleaning up. Then he heard him tread upstairs, and for a while Zim listened to him open some drawers, turn the faucets on in the upstairs bathroom, and then later on all was quiet. Zim tried to sleep. The smells he kept sniffing were nauseous. Everything stank at the Dib, and everything was dirty. There were old crumbs on the rug below, and the couch smelled distinctly of cigarette smoke. Dust clung to the coffee table, and old beer stanks clung here and there on the floor beyond the rug. Humans lived like savages. They even ate like savages. He did not like the silence. Occasionally, a car would flash by outside, dispelling the dull calm, and the motion of the clock on the mantel was more irritation than comfort. In his base, deep in his honeycomb, the computers were always humming, and the machinery and tubing had their own music. He could listen to the harmony of his paraphernalia wherever he was, and sleep beneath the warm, hissing vents, tight and cuddled in the far corner where he knew he was safe. Lying on this couch in an open parlor did not make him feel safe. Even so, to further put him at paradoxical odds, he was suddenly afraid to go back home and face his little robot child.